Welcome to the 8th and final video in our series for the YES program. This particular video talks about business ethics. We can't discuss ethics without also discussing two other concepts, and that is morality and legality. So let's start with morality. All three of these concepts focus on guiding our behavior to get us to do what we need to do. Morality is a particular system of values and principles and of conduct held by a specific person. In other words, it's very individual. You have a morality, I have a morality, and while they may overlap in a lot of ways, they're not identical. Ethics involves systematizing, as well as the ability to defend and recommend concepts of right and wrong behavior. Ethics, by systematizing it, makes it something that other people can adopt as well. And finally, legality is an act, agreement, or contract endorsed by the state. In other words, legality only enters into play when there is some sort of either law or regulation that we are expected to follow. Let's go into some little more details about morality. Morality is intrinsic. It is part of you. Morality comes from your very being. It is often described as that gut feeling of something being right or wrong. It can be shaped by a number of external factors, right? Morality isn't something you necessarily come up with on your own. You may be influenced by the teachings of your church, by your parents, by society, by some philosophy that you've read and agree with. So while there are many outside influences in your morality, it is fundamentally your morality. And as a result, because it is your morality, it applies to nobody else. What you think are right and wrong is totally fine for you, but because you have come to it from your unique experience, and there isn't necessarily a logic to it, one cannot expect your morality to apply to anyone else. And because there's not necessarily or always a logic to it, it doesn't need to be defended. If you think something is wrong because you think something is wrong, then it's wrong. And so there's no need to try and justify why it is wrong to anyone else. But because there's no need to justify why it is wrong to anyone else, what we find is we are often inconsistent in our morality, and that we will find exceptions that fit what we want to do. For example, you may be thinking that a particular action is immoral. Say, for example, you believe adultery or having an affair outside of your marriage is immoral, until your best friend does it. At which point you go, well, their marriage was ending anyway, and he's a good guy, and we can find all sorts of justifications and all sorts of reasonings why normal people who do it are bad, but not these special people over here. And that's because morality comes from our passions and our emotions. We feel very strongly about things. You will notice that in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide has been a picture that I purposely chose and left there. When you look at it, you have a very distinct, strong emotional feeling about that. Maybe it comes from your feelings about the police. Maybe it comes from your feelings about children. There's a very obviously distressed child there. You will notice that the woman helping her may not be white, and maybe that influences your feelings. And for the purposes of this discussion, I don't really care what your feelings are about this situation. You know nothing about the situation other than the picture, and yet you were able to form a unique, very passionate reaction to what is going on there. And that's morality. You have an internal compass, an internal sense of right and wrong, and that drives oftentimes what we do. Let's change and talk about ethics. Ethics are extrinsic, meaning they come from the outside. You either choose to follow them or they become imposed upon you when you join a specific group, because ethics do apply to a specific group. Now, if you come to the university and study ethics, you will take a look at some ethical thoughts that are general, that could and should apply to anyone. But people have to choose to follow those ethical lines of thought, and as a result, you have essentially chosen to become part of the group that follows that train of thought by espousing those ethics. So ethics are always applied to a specific group. And you adopt those ethics either explicitly, you say, yes, I am going to follow these rules, or implicitly, the act of joining the group means you're going to follow the rules. You don't specifically say, I'm going to follow the rules, when you join or identify with that group. And there's lots of examples that you may be familiar of ethics in your everyday lives. Some of you I know some of you may be thinking of becoming doctors or nurses. Well, there's something called the Hippocratic Oath that all medical professionals take. And it is a series of ethics. The most famous part of the Hippocratic Oath is the very first part, which is first, do no harm, meaning your primary job is to not make things worse. If you join the business group Rotary, they have what they call the Rotary four-way test, and you can see the graphic out there to the right. So for the things you think, say, or do, you need to ask yourself, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And if you can say yes to all four of those things, that is a good thing to do. Ethics are systematized. Notice the Rotary four-way test has 4 questions. And those questions are the same regardless of what it is that we are thinking or saying or doing. It could apply at work, it could apply with your family, it could apply with your friends. It is a system that can be universally applied in every situation. And as a result, it is consistent. In other words, it doesn't matter whether I'm doing the Rotary four-way test or you're doing the Rotary four-way test, we should be able to come up with the same answer. And because it is consistent, it is defensible. If I meet another Rotarian and they question what I've done, I can say, look, the thing I'm doing is the truth, it's fair to all concerned, it's going to build goodwill and better friendships, and it'll be beneficial to everyone. And they would, even if their morality was telling them that that wasn't a good idea, they would need to reevaluate that. And the reason that these things are defensible is because they are systematized, because we're doing the exact same thing, the exact same way, every single time. They are defensible because of the system, not because our moralities all agree. And this is why ethics can be very helpful in a situation like a business where we all come from different backgrounds and different experiences, etc. By having a clear-cut ethical decision-making process, I don't have to worry about where you went to church or where you grew up or who your family is, because we're going to follow these sets of questions, these guidelines, this recipe, whatever you want to call it, this system, to arrive at our answer. And that way we can all defend that answer should anyone ever question it. Finally, let's talk about legality. So many times businesses say, well, we're going to follow the law. We don't need an ethics statement. We're just going to follow the law. Well, let's talk about legality. Legality, like ethics, are extrinsic, right? The state, whether that be the state government, the city government, the federal government, whomever, are applying these rules to us. The thing about legality is it doesn't focus on right and wrong. It focuses on prohibition and requirement. In other words, things we can't do, prohibition, and things that we must do, requirement. Well, as you all know in your lives, there's lots of things that you don't have to do and that you could do, right? So there's a lot of gray area in that space. And so the law does not provide us any guidance on things we should do. Okay? So, prohibition, things you can't do, such as discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, or genetic information. Or things you must do, like file your taxes. As a result, there is no judgment of right, only things that are wrong, because you either did something you weren't supposed to do, or you didn't do something you had to do. And so as a business, if you're trying to figure out, well, what is the right thing to do, legality is not going to give you any guidance. So how do we apply the concept of ethics to business? We need a system that we all can follow so that we don't have conflicts in decisions based on one's individual morality, and yet we know the law, following the law is not enough. So in business ethics, the first thing we need to do is analyze the problem and define the issue. In other words, what is the challenge that we are wanting to come up with? Maybe we're talking about hiring someone. Well, I want to make sure that I'm getting the best person possible, regardless of any other extrinsic factors, regardless of who they're friends with, regardless of obviously the legal things that we have to be aware of, but I want to get the best person for this job. So that's the problem, that's the issue that we are defining. Second, we need to generate some solutions. Well, how are we going to find the best person possible? What are the things that we can do? And so in the generating of the solutions, all solutions at this point are fine. You then want to test the solutions, find out, at least in a thought exercise, what the results could be depending on the solutions you use. Pick one of them and implement it. Okay, we're going to put it in real world. We're going to do one of the solutions, and then we're going to evaluate the results. Did we get what we were expecting out of our decision? As we define the issue, we have lots of sources of conflict in our workplace and society. Lots of things that could potentially be problems. We have, for example, competing interests of stakeholders and the stakes that they need. The people who are investors in my business might want me to do something that will benefit their financial situation that may be a detriment to the people who work for my business. The people who work for my business want a secure job, want a good workplace. That may not always be the best for my financial position. So, two sets of people that I have to satisfy, both with legitimate wants and needs, but there will be instances where those two things come into conflict, and I need to find a way to make a decision that I can defend to both parties. Not saying both parties will be happy about it, but I need to be able to defend it to both parties to come up with a good answer. People will often disagree about facts surrounding an issue. You see this in your families all the time, right? You said this, you said you were going to do that. I didn't say that, I said something else. Well, you were both there in the conversation. You both have a strong memory of what happened, and yet you can't agree on what was said. And you know, that's something really simple. Now we get into, well, what does a contract say? What are measurements? Things that, you know, delve deeply into things that could become legal issues. So facts surrounding issues, we like to think of facts as firm things that we can all agree on. But there's an old joke that has been told that underlines this point. If I take one haystack and I add another haystack, how many haystacks do I have? Some of you are going to say two. You have two haystacks. Well, no. If I add the one haystack to the other haystack, I just have one bigger haystack. So in that case, 1 + 1 is 1, right? Disagreements about facts surrounding an issue. People have different interpretations and concepts of meaning and application. One thing that I have been a USA Swimming swim official for well over a decade, and have officiated swim meets where there are Olympians swimming and state records being broken, etc. And so I have a fairly good knowledge of the rules in the rule book. And one of the rules regarding swimming, and I don't know how many of you are swimmers, but there's a stroke called the breaststroke. And in the breaststroke, the rule states that for the stroke, the part that the arms are doing, that the hands must be brought forward together from the chest, and the elbows cannot leave the water. Right? That's the definition of the stroke. The hands must be brought forward together in the same plane in the elbow. And that rule, I would think, should be applied to everyone swimming the race. And many of you may be agreeing with that, right? The rules should be the same for everybody. And so, I always then follow up with the question when I'm talking about this to a regular class, what about the swimmer with one arm? The rule states both arms must be brought forward together in the same plane. I can't have both and together if I only have one arm. Does that mean, according to the rules, people with one arm should not be allowed to swim the breaststroke? Well, of course it doesn't. We have to have a different interpretation of that rule because that rule as written does not apply exactly to that swimmer. People come to certain things with different morals and values. You may have been told that killing is wrong in every instance, and maybe someone else was told, well, killing is wrong except, when someone was a murderer or a rapist, and then the state should give the death penalty. I think there are logical, valid arguments to be made for both of those things. But the point is, when it comes to making a decision about an individual who has committed one of those crimes that one of you thinks they should die for and one of you thinks that they don't, you're going to be in a conflict. There is no middle ground. People are dead or they're not. And so recognizing that while, yes, obviously on big issues like death penalty and abortion and guns and all those things we see in the news all the time, we have different morals and values. There are different morals and values that come into the business world. For example, when I was the director of IT for an organization, we needed a new internet service provider. So I went out and got quotes from a number of them. Someone that I know and had known from a previous job was working for an internet service provider. They had a really good product. You used to see billboards along the freeway for this company. The company doesn't exist anymore. They got bought out. But when they were an independent company, you used to see billboards all the time along the highways, about 99.99998% uptime. And their price was about the same as everyone else. It was slightly higher, but they had a great reputation, good people to work with. And so when I brought my recommendation forward to my boss, I said, look, here are 3 different companies all offering the same thing. I recommend this one. Yes, their price is a little higher, but they have the best reputation in the field. And by the way, I happen to know the salesperson, but that is not entering into my decision. The company, my boss and I decided to go with the company my friend worked for. And after about, 3 or 4 months of using their service, we were really happy. It was great service. I happened to be out of the office that day, but he stopped by with a really nice sweatshirt as a thank you gift for the business. Now, there are some people who would go, it's a $40 to $60 sweatshirt, what's the big deal, keep it. My personal morals and values said, I personally did not earn that sweatshirt. The gift was not to me as a person. The gift was to the business to thank them for the business. And so I took that sweatshirt to HR. First I went to my boss and I said, there's this sweatshirt. I think it belongs to the company. And my boss told me I was an idiot, I should keep it. But I took the sweatshirt to HR and said, next time we have a company, drawing, or we have a party where we're giving away door prizes, here's a door prize that you should give away. because it's not mine, right? That was my set of morals and values. There was no company policy that said I had to do it. But because we all come in with different morals and values, that could be a source of conflict. Problems get framed for presentation. When I was telling you about the swimming rule, I told it to you in such a way that your initial response was, well, of course, all the rules should apply to everybody in exactly the same way. Even though I knew I was going to follow that up with something about a one-armed swimmer, and that might cause you to change your mind. But by that point, I'd backed you into a corner. I had gotten you to agree with one set of premises. And so that is an example of framing the problem for the presentation. I could have started with, we have rules that talk about doing things with 2 arms and 2 legs, but what if you don't have 2 arms and 2 legs? That could have been my starting point, rather than, here is this rule. Don't we all agree that everyone should follow the rules? And by getting you to agree with that, I could then use that as a weapon against the one-armed or one-legged swimmer. So once you've recognized all the things that could potentially cause conflict, now we have to figure out how to resolve those conflicts. So disagreements about facts can usually be resolved with additional research, right? If you and I had a conversation, we disagreed about who said what. Maybe there's video or audio recording of that conversation. That additional research could resolve who said what. Disagreements over concepts can sometimes be resolved by looking at similar things that involve the same concept, or drawing analyses or comparisons to the present case. So for example, let's say swimming had never dealt with a one-armed swimmer before. Is there something that they could do to figure out how to treat that one-armed swimmer? Well, can we take a look at how track and field has dealt with athletes with one leg, or some other parallel, some other similar situation that might illuminate what our possibilities are going forward in this situation. Disagreements over values can often be solved if both parties are willing, with compromises or trade-offs. My boss thought it was silly that I wasn't willing to keep the sweatshirt. I didn't think I earned it. So rather than giving it back to the company that gave us the gift, we put it in a pool of potential gifts for other people in the organization. And if I happen to win it due to a drawing where everyone had a fair chance, then I have a sweatshirt. But if not, then we've still satisfied both sets of people. It is always important, whenever you are defining the issue that you need to solve, to look at the problem from a number of different frames. In other words, don't just view it from the frame of, for example, as a swim official. Well, it's really easy for me to follow the rules as exactly as written as a swim official, because then my instruction is clear, right? Well, you don't have 2 arms and 2 legs, there's no both, you're out. But I'm not the only party involved as the official. There is the swimmer who has 1 arm. There are the other swimmers swimming in the race. There are the coaches. There are the parents. There is the governing body of swimming itself. And it's important to recognize that each of them has a legitimate stake in what's going on. And who is going to be harmed, who is going to be benefited, all of these things should come into play when you're thinking about the issue. When you're generating solutions, you need to brainstorm. And in true brainstorming, it is not polarized. In other words, we are all a team. There's no us and them. In a brainstorming session, we are all working together, which means we have to have respect and trust for each other. I have to know that any idea that you are going to bring up is not going to be just to sabotage the discussion or to get my goat. I have to show you that trust, and then you have to respect my contributions at the other end. As a result, we suspend all critique and criticism. In the brainstorming portion, even the most ridiculous ideas are okay as ideas. We'll go through and filter them later and figure out what things are actually doable, what things are truly ridiculous, etc. But as far as brainstorming, we'll take anything, because as a result, even a ridiculous idea might then trigger something in someone else's head that comes up with a solution that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And these non-obvious solutions can sometimes be the best things. You know, if we're talking about, you know, how do we keep an airplane flying? You know, someone says, well, just turn off gravity. Obviously, you can't turn off gravity, but maybe someone saying turn off gravity triggers someone else to think about the problem in a different way. Well, what if we didn't have gravity? Well, then not only are we keeping the airplane up, but we would have a hard time bringing it back down. So what are the forces that cause things to go up and down, right? The ridiculous solutions can sometimes result in good, real solutions. Once you are done brainstorming, now we can refine the list. One of the things we can do is eliminate the obviously unethical things, right? You know, students may be thinking, well, how do we make homework easier? Well, we could just shoot all the teachers because they assign the homework. I think it's pretty obvious that it's unethical to shoot teachers for homework. But in addition to eliminating the obvious and unethical issues, we can look for overlap. Maybe these two solutions in the brainstorming session were very similar. And maybe they're non-mutually exclusive, meaning maybe we can do both. And so maybe we can apply multiple solutions to an answer to get an even better solution than any one of them on their own. Then we need to test those solutions. And there are lots of different ways to test those solutions. The first is the reversibility test. So I have a potential solution to the swimming thing. And I say, well, I'm going to let the one-armed swimmer swim using the same motion, and I'm just going to ignore the both and together part. So from the reversibility test, I need to look at it not only from that swimmer's perspective, who it obviously benefits because they get to swim, but I also need to look at it from the competitor's perspective. Is it fair to those competitors that I will apply that rule that way? Is it fair to the coaches, both the coach of the one-armed swimmer and the coach of the two-armed swimmers, that I apply those rules that way? So what does it look like from other people's perspectives? We need to do the harm beneficence test, right? This is a cost-benefit analysis, a risk assessment, a Pareto analysis. These are the things that say, if we do this thing, how much good will be created versus how much bad, right? It's a pretty just, you know, this or that. You know, if I let the one-armed swimmer swim, he or she gets to swim, could potentially, you know, make the Olympic team, potentially be a world champion, et cetera, et cetera. The harm would be someone else would not make the Olympic team, someone else would not be a world champion, but the one-armed swimmer could be held up as a role model, could be held up as something that would allow other one-armed potential athletes to go, I can do that because they can do that, right? These are the kinds of harm beneficence things you're going to balance. You do the publicity test. Often the shortcut we hear about in the publicity test is, would your grandmother be proud if she knew you made this decision? And if you don't think your grandmother would be proud if you knew she made this decision and you want her to be proud of you, potentially that's not a good idea. Another way to think about it is, what if on you know, the national news, such and such company implemented this new thing or made this decision, and then they showed your picture and your name as the person who did that. If you aren't necessarily willing to stand out and say, yes, this was the decision that we made, perhaps it's not the best decision. And then finally, we have the feasibility test. Can you actually do it? Like the turn off gravity thing, right? So maybe you can't do it because you don't have the resources, you know, the money, the people, etc. Maybe you can't do it because you don't have the technology yet. Or maybe you can't or don't want to do it because of various other interests or legal constraints. We don't want to close down this factory because it's the biggest employer in the area, or it was the original factory of our company, and so it's part of our company's history, or maybe because we've been told by the court we can't. There's all sorts of reasons that you could or could not do something. And the reason we do all four of these tests, a reversibility test, a harm beneficence test, a publicity test, and a feasibility test, is because they all come from different strains of ethical thought. And so if my solution passes all four of those tests, right, it seems to be fair to everybody involved, the good seems to outweigh the bad, I would be happy to attach my name to this decision and we can do it, probably a good indication that it's a good decision. However, if it fails one or more of these tests, then there is a sector of ethical thought that you're acting unethically. And maybe you should look for a better solution. Now, maybe it will still be the best solution, right? We will occasionally be in situations where there is no good answer, there's only a least bad answer. At which point you still want to strive for the least bad answer. And this comparing of the four different tests is what we call meta-testing. In other words, it's a test of the tests. So the first meta-test we want to do is the convergence test. How many of those tests do I agree with? The more tests you agree with, the stronger your answer is. And then the other meta-test is the divergence tests. So if not all of the tests agree, the more we get a no, maybe it's not feasible, maybe it's not reversible, maybe the harm outweighs the benefit, but I'd be okay with having my name on it. Well, that's still not a very good solution because it fails three of the four tests. So that's our discussion of ethics. I hope when you leave and when you think about decisions that you need to make, you remember all decisions should be ethical. And your ethics should be something that are publicly known, so that as you make decisions and you follow your ethical thoughts, you can easily defend them. Look, here are the things I thought about, here are the solutions I came up with, here is how I rationed through it, and here is why I made that decision. Not because everyone's going to agree with you, but because you can stand up and proudly say, I made a good choice. You may not even be able to say you made the best choice, but you can say, I made a good choice because I used logic, I was impartial, and I followed my own set of rules. So thanks a lot, and hope you've enjoyed this series of videos.